This is yet another non-awkward beginning to an episode of the Outcast Intellectual Podcast. And one of our MVPs of all time returns for the sequel. It's funny enough, we were just talking about sequels to books. This is the sequel to Krislyn McGettigan 2. No, it's 5 by this point.
This is version 3.0.
Right?
I think so. I think this is the third time.
It's version 3 because we say so.
Yeah, perfect.
And we're going to stop talking about psychology for a brief moment in order to talk about something else that you have plenty of experience with, which is education. And something that we both feel could be improved, one might say, to put it lightly. And I think the first thing that occurs to me, which is I think something that we would get to anyway, and you would probably know this better than me, but I've often heard that like the system, and this is going to be about the American education system, at least from my end, because it's like, we're Americans, like I don't know what else to tell you. Maybe you have more of an international awareness of it, but like that the American school system model, and this is primary school, like was largely just taken from like, I think it was like the German system for like making it so people could be workers or something. I forget what it was.
So the idea of compensatory school, if I'm remembering any of like my education on education, I believe it was started around the turn of the century, as in like the 1900s. So when we got there was this idea that we needed to prepare the youth of America for being functional citizens, right? And I also want to say this went hand in hand with child labor laws starting to become a thing, because as those two things balanced out, the idea of like you have a kid that's working at 5 or 6 versus you have a kid in school training to work at 5 or 6, it really was all sort of the same, 6 1/2 dozen the other. We knew that sending children into coal mines at 6 was probably like a bad idea, but like prepping them for those coal mines might not be so bad. And then it's hilarious. We won't get political here, but it is hilarious to me, the Make America Great Again movement, because like then, back when America was great, there started to be this shift towards holistic whole child views of education, where we started feeding them lunch, we started having a nurse in schools, we started having physical education, things that weren't necessarily directly related to just working started to become commonplace. And that's kind of ebbed and flowed since the inception of that. Then the law got involved, and then we guaranteed every child a free and appropriate public education that is living in America. Every child is entitled to that. So then now we're fucking around with legal shit and federal mandates, and it got very fucky-wucky. So that is your extremely concise overview of the history of American education.
Gotcha. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
This has been the Outcast.
Yeah, that's all you get.
Right? You have to pay for the rest. This is America.
Can you imagine we just start charging for this? You can Google this information, but you won't get the flair. So that's what you're paying for. The flair.
Yeah, we're gonna have a freaking OnlyFans just because our freaking interviews are so sassy.
That's right. That's right. We'll throw a foot in there. Woo! Okay. That's enough.
I mean, but that's the hilarious thing is that would probably be a niche somewhere,
right?
Edutainment podcasts consisting of raunchy elements. Hey, it's only 2022. We have the rest of the 2020s to go, and at this point, you never know.
Sky's the limit.
I mean, we literally have Twitch streams where girls are just in hot tubs talking to people, so it's.
This is actually I know that it feels like we've gotten off topic, folks, but this is actually very related to education, because the whole idea of education, to come full circle, is to prepare young Americans for being functional, working Americans. And of course, we want to think that we have their best interest in mind to be like nurturing that they can do whatever they want to do. But here's the thing, if you want to be an OnlyFans girl, let's say that's what you want to do. I don't know why you know about that when you're like 8 and you're like, I want to grow up and be an OnlyFans girl. That's actually
because of this.
We should probably call child services on that
one. Because of this. That's
right.
why they know.
But the point is, okay, so what do we need to do? Like from a logical standpoint, the question should be, what do we need to do to prepare you for your outcome as an adult to do the thing you want to do, right? And of course, we want to be able to say, well, like, not every person that is 8 and is like, I want to be an OnlyFans girl is going to stick with that and want that. They're right. We need to prepare.
Here's hoping.
We need backups. But I obviously I hope that there are no 8-year-olds that actually want to do this. But I use it to illustrate a point, right? That the way that the public school system is set up very much supports a select handful of occupations. And those are rapidly changing. We don't even know what occupations are going to exist in the next 30 years. Genuinely, like we have no idea. So how do we prepare kids for things we don't even know about? And why do we stick with the same old shit from literally 100 years ago when we're trying to prep them to be? Because here's what I was encountering when I worked in public education. I was a school psychologist, so I usually got the kids that were like throwing shit at teachers and like having a hard time. They'd come to me.
As hard as the time as that teacher's face, am I right?
But they'd come to me and they'd be like, Mrs. McGettigan, I don't know why I have to do any of this. It's, I was in algebra and I fucking hate algebra and I'm never gonna have to use algebra in my life. And if I do need to use it, I'll Google it. So here are some really interesting points that this like 12-year-old child is bringing up to me as to why they don't want to do it. And every time I was in the situation trying to be like, no, but like, please go back to class and participate. My only like way of trying to make that make sense to them was like, okay, you don't want to be in school. A lot of these kids were like, I want to just work for money. I don't want to be here doing nothing. Makes sense. You're 12. Can't really do that right now, but I understand your logic.
Lemonade.
Yeah, whatever, right? Like, okay, go crypto. I don't know, but long story short,
boy unboxing channel on YouTube and become a millionaire like that other kid.
Well, and I had some serious smarties that like had next level skills in certain areas related to like computers that I would never fucking know. That will be that kind of person. But that school, it's absolutely not matched to their needs or outcomes because of how rigid we are with it, right? But for this girl, the only thing I could say to her when she was like, algebra's stupid, why do I have to do this? It has nothing to do with the real world for me. All I could say to her was, yeah, but when you do have a job, sometimes your boss is gonna make you do shit you don't think you need to do. And you're gonna have to do it. And that is the level of insight I had with all my fucking education and all of my background. That was the only piece of information I could give her, right? Yeah. To justify that.
I mean, to be fair, when it does come to real life success in any capacity, the ability to do something that you don't want on the way to something that you do want is a characteristic or, muscle, whatever you want to, kind of turn it into as a metaphor that many people do not have.
Agreed.
And when I say do not have, I don't mean lack the ability to do it. It's one that they never cultivated, because it's not like you need some special gift to do something you don't want to do. We do that every day when we get up,
Yeah, quite literally.
So it's like, it's just a matter of cultivating it. Did you start out with massive traps and delts? No. But you have them now.
I'm on a fitness journey for anyone that hasn't picked up on it.
Now they know.
Now that
they know. They have no choice but to know.
Don't mess with my delts. Traps. Right? Yeah, but okay, so to your point, great. There's a lot of people that don't have that trait, and it's very helpful for like success as an adult, right? However,
they do come from school, so obviously it's not like
okay, but let's pretend that they sucked at school and they just fucking failed everything. Maybe they never learned that skill. We're also not presenting it to them like that. We're presenting it to them like don't you want to get to 8th grade? And they're like, I don't fucking care. This is stupid. I don't want to get to 8th grade. I want to get a fucking job at McDonald's at this point because I hate this. Right. And because it's not structured for them. Like, this is slightly controversial in some nuanced areas of this thought I'm having, but like, school's not made for everyone. It's just not. I know that the government would like to think that we can adapt the environment, and that was actually my job, was to identify kids where school was not a good fit for whatever reason, and it had to be disability related, and then figure out a way to adapt this school system as inexpensively as possible to meet the needs of kids.
And that's the thing, though, is, and it kind of ties into I think it was our last conversation when we were talking about like how, okay, it's okay for people to be criticized, but what about society? And it's like, okay, so the only time when we're going to individualize education is when someone is supposedly retarded in some way. Like, that's just a stupid way to look at it. Like,
don't use those words, but yes.
Well, that's fine. That's what I'm here for. But the point being is like, because again, like what I talked about, it's like very few people who would be, like, even if somebody was called retarded back in the day, maybe the way that they are, like in many ways would be considered that, but they could also theoretically just be an amazing dancer or whatever, or like a really, like if you're a theoretical mathematician, you don't need to have the speech, the presentation skills of, a freaking diplomat.
Right.
So it's like, it comes back to what characteristics are actually valuable. When you take the like Clifton or Colby or something like that, they don't try to tell you how smart that you are. They try to tell you how you are so that you can make that work. So if the education system is going to continue to think about this thing from the narrow-minded perspective of you aren't exactly this way, therefore there's something wrong with you, then it's going to, it's not going to, it is falling behind because it's just not, ironically, it's leaving children behind.
Yeah.
Break this drum kit. Because it's trying to treat everybody like they're the same.
Yes.
And we're not.
And in fact, I would argue, again, another controversial opinion, that there are less students that fit the mold and the support systems that public school currently offers with its current curriculum than there are that, So what the fuck? Right. But, and here's the thing, is that a lot of what was very frustrating to me working in public schools, and one of the reasons I left, was because of the red tape. Like, the way that changes are made or not made in a public school come down to the school board, and a lot of time to the community opinion. And yes, see if we can do it.
I have a question to tack on to the end of this train of thought.
Yeah, okay. So the idea that, like, maybe you're a parent and your kid's in public school and you're starting to see the things we're talking about, and you're like, well, why can't we have a curriculum that's more supportive of like my kids' needs? Because I bet there's a lot of kids that have this need. You're going to go to a school board meeting and be one voice among many, and to get any kind of decision making through, it not only involves public opinion, the opinion of a school board, but now we also have to talk about budget. We also have to talk about how it fits into federal mandates or state mandates, and making any kind of significant movement forward towards like things that make sense is just filled with barriers and obstacles to the point that it just never truly happens.
Right. It's like having a third political party that has an equal chance of getting anybody into any position of authority. It's possible, but that doesn't mean it's probable. And it's that actually, while you're talking about that, is what made me think of this. What do you think about the idea of if education was taken private?
I have such mixed feelings about this.
Which is why I'm asking, I'm saying, oh, well, if only it was like this,
So I don't want to, there are good things and bad things about what we have currently, right? Like anything. One of the things that I do like about federal mandates right now is that every child's guaranteed a free education, right? That's great. The way that we, right, I mean, tax, But the way that we're doing that right now is fucky, like for a lot of the reasons I mentioned. But I like that every child has access to this thing, right? When we privatize school, I see a lot of similar issues with how we have publicized school. You know, certain areas of, like, if I live in a certain geographical area, do I have access to a private school that's of a similar quality that someone who lives in a different area has access to? The ideal of public schools was that we have a grading system and all schools are supposed to stand up against each other. We know this is bullshit, but at least we're like pretending to try. My fear with going private is that that will disappear. And that certain parts of things guaranteed in public education, like transportation, like, you know, reduced lunches and meal plans for, I truly feel like if we privatize school, the poorest citizens will suffer, as always. So those are my concerns there. I have a good friend of mine that believes the government should not be involved in fucking anything ever. And I get a lot of interesting insight from hearing his opinion on things, because
Is he muscly?
He's very, very large and muscly. But I get a lot of very interesting insights listening to his opinions on things, because I've never considered them before, and I've never had anyone in my life that's challenged me to think, what if you removed all government? And so when I bring up like, okay, well, if we did that, how would we, you know, make things more equitable or equal for people who are poor? And his, if I'm understanding correctly, it has a lot to do with charitable. You know, I feel uneasy about relying on charity to make sure that our poor children are accessing education in the way that our more wealthy families are, but I also don't know. I'm not an economist. Those are some of the things that I see as downfalls to privatizing school.
I guess to try to think of it from that perspective, someone could say it's like, okay, you know, these certain business models find a way to make it work so that they can, you know, really upsell, you know, middle class to, you know, whatever, a given economic group onward. But then inevitably you're also going to have those other people who they can't do that. And so theoretically someone else would see that opportunity in terms of business and would realize, oh, there are way more poor people than there are rich people, economy of scale, and I will just get tens of millions of poorer people into my program or whatever. And sure, they may not be paying as much, but there are a lot of them. And so I will still make lots of money by doing this. Like, I think that that's probably the reply that somebody who would believe that the private education is the answer would give, because it's the marketplace, you know, finding an answer. And if somebody sees that this audience is not being leveraged or being sold to, then they're going, you know, theoretically they would try to come up with that kind of solution.
Yeah, and I think the other part that makes my brain have a hard time sort of fully comprehending this question of privatizing schools is like, how on earth would we make the transition? That I think is where it gets really fucky. Like, so
there's three, and then there's
like are any public funds going to subsidize private education? Like currently, the Supreme Court case that just happened related to religious involvement in education, and I believe that had to do with it was in such a rural part of Maine that it had to do with like the relative accessibility to the schools that are around you. And one of the schools that was around was a religious school. And so families were like, why can't I get my free and appropriate public education someplace I can actually physically access, because we're in the most remote fucking part of Maine, but I can't just because it's a religious school. And so that's when Supreme Court said, no, that's okay. And now it's opened up the floodgates of like, okay, so what else is okay when we're incorporating religion into public school systems? So that's getting all fucking rough. But it is interesting to look at like the private versus public, like stipends and subsidizing of those things. and
Right.
what's already currently happening, because it does look like that is sort of where things want to naturally go. Public schools are not thriving. I don't think anyone is surprised by that
Yeah.
statement.
Yeah.
And I think for every like 10 teachers that are retiring, only 6 teachers are coming into the field right now. So like, which is not surprising because it takes a lot of money and investment on
It
the
pays
front
like
end.
shit.
Pays like shit. It's really difficult work. Here's a pet peeve. When anyone's like, yeah, but you got the summer off. I was like, if I didn't get the summer off, I literally would have burned the school down, like fucking Joker style. So I don't want to hear about how lucky I am that I got like a couple of vacation weeks.
Yeah, that you don't get actually paid for like during the
Yeah.
summer. So you have the summer off. You mean I have the summer to find another means of keeping myself not homeless.
I
Um,
mean, you can
and
divide your paycheck up so that you get paid over the summer, but you're not
right,
actually paid for that.
it's not
Yeah.
the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You just are convincing your brain it's okay.
yeah. By the way, Robert, our buddy, our cowboy buddy, was wondering what we're talking about. It's kind of just like we're just like thinking about like how education is and like how it could be improved or what the nature of it is as to why maybe it would be difficult to improve. Like so, for example, like what Krislyn just mentioned, it's like, okay, say that transitioning things over to, private education, say that was just the answer, you would still need to figure out how to do that, which is another thing. Like when I talked to our buddy Maddie about like hunting and stuff like that, where it's like, if at the moment the way that like nature preserves are largely kept open is when hunters go there and pay to hunt a given amount of animals, and that is largely what keeps them open, which otherwise probably many more animals would die. Ideally, obviously, you would just have a giant pool of money that could just keep these preserves open and you would never have to do the hunting. But
Wouldn't that be great?
exactly. So it's
Yeah.
like even if something were ideal, which isn't to say that in this case it is relative to private education, uh, it would still need to actually be done. Um, Burn it down and start it. But yeah, Robert's like, burn it down and start over. We're not designed to live like this at all.
I actually really agree with them. We're not.
I feel
When,
like
yeah.
I feel like we could constructively reallocate resources in a way that doesn't involve having to live in straw huts and once again enjoy like getting like worms going into our feet because we're not wearing shoes and stuff like that.
No,
I feel like there's a happy middle ground here.
I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking more like when he says burn it to the ground, burn the current idea of what school looks like to the ground. Because so my issues, I don't have children. I would like to, and so hopefully that's in the future. But I already have just made the decision. I don't want my kids going to public school, and it's not because I'm afraid of public school or any of those things. It's not because I'm too good for public school, but it is because I don't think it is as relevant as it used to be with the options of like what our kids are good. Like we were just talking about at the beginning of the podcast. We don't even know what jobs are going to be available in 30 years. We don't have any idea. What I do know is that asking a child to sit in a chair for 8 hours a day and listen to all the rules and obey at all times is
Never
like,
get up.
so I don't know what the schooling that my husband and I will end up choosing for our kid will look like. I don't know if that's going to be private or homeschooled or whatever, but I do have like certain things that I just believe don't work. And to Robert's point, this idea that like school needs to be a place where you sit in a classroom and learn algebra for fucking that many, like, I just don't see that as being applicable to right now. I understand we need to get our kids to like understand how rules work and like stay focused on things because these are life skills, right? These are worker skills that we need. That's part of why school is structured the way it is, because you would go to a factory and stand in place for 8 hours. And so you better be able to sit your ass in a chair for 8 hours. But that's not really, that doesn't need to be everybody's outcome, right? So yeah, like I agree with Robert. Kind of need to just scrap it and start over.
And he's even making some interesting points about like, how do you calculate a price per, you said email then, or email though? That one I didn't understand as much, but or the margin on your business, or how you calculate taxes. Like that's, I think I'm pretty sure he was saying that's crazy. Yeah, so yeah, that's, oh no, that's scary. A woman just agreed with me. Good old Robert. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things where, I mean, that would be kind of an interesting thing to do as like a as a podcast idea. Like if I would if I was doing more of these a week, to like have just like a marketing one where it's like, okay, you have an offer that you need to make, go. You know what I mean? And it's like, education. So like, what's the education funnel? And these things like, okay, so we like, are we trying to capitalize on early education, or are we trying to get were we trying to go deep? Are we trying to get like, from, when they're little to when they're teenagers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Are we looking for lifelong clients, right? Like,
right.
They'll be loyal. Yeah.
Are we going to have an affiliate program? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's really, I think that's really cool to think about stuff like that.
That is a reality for some of the more bougie, expensive private schools, though, right? Like there is like a marketing team and a funnel to get people there if you've got the money to do it. And if you look at some of the alternatives in early childhood education, like Montessori or Reggio schools or Waldorf schools, I can never pronounce that one. Waldorf, whatever. There's all these different like philosophical schools of thought where like your kid can go to this preschool, but then they almost always end up getting dumped into public school. If you got a lot of money, then they go to private school. But like during my internship, I worked with a kindergartner who came from the Montessori school, and it was so different than public school that he got referred for a disability for me to check up and see if he had a disability, and he was perfectly fine. The teacher was just like, he doesn't know how to fit into it. He's so slow. We need to go. And he's just like taking his sweet ass time. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't mean he's disabled. Just because he doesn't want to react as soon as you tell him to do something and rush for his backpack and pack it up and go. Like you're saying that he's fucked up pretty much.
Yeah. And like John D. Rockefeller was literally like one of the richest people of all time. And he always liked to go slow with things. And then when he made his decision, then it was done. Like it was like mechanical, but he was very much more the tortoise than the hare. So is he retarded? It's like
that's the point, right? Is that if you don't fit exactly in this box that we have made, and our teachers are like, first of all, I don't have anything negative to say about teachers individually. They do an extremely fucking hard job. I would never do it. And you really have to love kids and love what you're doing to ever fucking do this. Is like
to not strangle them.
Jesus Christ. So like all the respect and love in the world for our teachers. However, in order to get what they need to get done in a day done, they do have to rush that kid that came from Montessori school and be like, we have to go. It's time to go to gym. The whole freaking line left to go to gym, and you're still like fucking tucking your folder in your backpack. We have to go. Right. And that kid just feels like, what did I do? And dude, he's 6. And he's like, I don't know what I did. Why does the teacher hate me? This kid did say, why does my teacher hate me? And I'm like, oh. But
all disorders are genetic. It has nothing to do with being told that you're fucked up from the age of like 6 onwards by, everything else.
But how fucky is that? This is a 6-year-old that knew what the word nefarious meant. Extremely bright.
Right.
And
well, that's another reason though why, okay, maybe, there's the challenge of transitioning something to say, a different system, but regardless, the approach that public school takes and the decision-making process sees and so on just are not working. Maybe maybe they're treading water, but we don't like, why are we just treading water? Why are we okay with this? Because it works. It doesn't work. It's just, it's just alive. It's as much of a, vibrant educational system as somebody who's on life support. Like they're still breathing because something is making it do that.
Yes.
And maybe they wake up great. But like, that doesn't change the fact that, okay, well, like, why did this person, like, did this person have to go on life support in the first place? Did we have to put him into a medically induced coma or something like that? Like, that is largely the way that the public like school system works. And it's like we have computers that can calculate in real time how to adjust thrusters on rockets so that it can actually get where the hell it's going in space. But we can't come up with like a, like an AI that can help teachers like create personality profiles and whatnot, like learning profiles for like students in real time by observing trends and stuff like that. Like, it's possible.
It takes too much time. That's what the real problem is like we would love to say we differentiate learning based on like individual needs. So, whatever your needs are, I'm going to meet them in the same classroom that I'm going to meet whatever Timmy's needs are. And that's a lovely idealistic view of things, but it's just not realistic.
Why not?
Because there's not enough time.
Because we have schools all over the country where you can literally magnify the data by just implementing it in different situations. And I'm, again, like, I know this is like a theoretical thing as well, but I mean, like, I can't be talking about this exact school systems like planning committee or whatever. Like, this is just like, would the idea work? And it's like, and like Robert was saying, like, what's the benefits of this system by identifying that, like the individual elements of like the personality profile? The benefit of that is that instead of saying that somebody is dumb or disabled or whatever it might be, you can just understand that there are these different personality types that are geared towards different things, and then you can teach to that. And I know you say that it would take too much time to do that, but maybe if it was just people doing it, but it would take way too much time for people to do a whole shitload of things that computers do. That's part of why computers exist.
So I actually agree with a lot of what you're saying, but first of all, it sounds like what I'm hearing is like strengths-based learning and teaching. So instead of accommodating for weaknesses, we build the whole educational program around strengths.
Well, maybe they're not weaknesses. Maybe they only look like weaknesses because of how things are structured now.
That's an extremely valid point. If a child with autism is in a school system that's full of fluorescent lights, screaming kids, like large crowds of people all around them, and they're having a hard time functioning, is it because they're disabled, or is it because this environment is literally going against everything that them being a human person needs, right? So I do agree with you, and I think the idea of building, I say strengths versus weaknesses, but let's just cut the whole weaknesses out. We're not looking at that. We're just looking at how do you learn best? Because that's what you're looking for right now, right? How do you learn best, and how do we support
planning,
how do we
tutoring,
support
listening, that? Right? Yeah.
I think so as someone who used tests, not computers necessarily, but like the idea of something standardized to try to identify these things, there are limitations to that. So I think that you could probably get about 70% of your kids with like a computer process that you're talking about to fall into like, oh, we'll do this instead of that. But then there's always going to be these outlier cases that are like, it doesn't really fit any of our algorithm. We're going to have to punt and be flexible about it. So I think there's definitely merit to the idea of that. But then you also have to remember that you've already set limitations just based on how you're designing your program. So if it's a computer program that's assessing a child's strengths, it's limited to whatever you've put in there to assess them. Does that make sense?
In a sense, yeah.
So for example, like to make an analogy to like IQ tests, okay? So I've given a shitload of IQ tests. And if you've ever looked at like a genuine IQ test, there are certain things that it's measuring, and then there's a shitload of things it's not measuring. So I had one kid during my practicum that had an IQ based on 2 different tests, standardized IQ tests, regular in use, of like 40 to 50. So you and I hear that and go, is this person even breathing? It's so fucking low. This kid was so smart at tricking his teachers, and he could manipulate his behavior to get exactly what he wanted. Isn't that some kind of intelligence? We're not measuring that intelligence with this test, but it exists.
Well, but that also kind of necessitates, like, that's how long have those tests been around? Because it's also like the same thing. It's like, think about it this way, because we're marketers. Robert's a marketer. Like, think if you had teams evaluating things like marketing teams do you really think it would take that long to dial that shit in? You know what I mean? Because it's like, and that's where I'm coming from with it. It's like, yes, I understand that as the apparatus is set up now, that wouldn't work. But this is another reason why, like, I brought up the private thing to begin with, because, okay, maybe public institutions would never do that. Maybe it wouldn't even be that things would go fully private. Maybe one private thing would do it right. Everybody would see, like, look, this is way better. And then public schools would be like, I guess we'll do that too. And
I'd love to see that. That would be a great. That would be a great outcome for it. Is if the idea of like vouchers being available to go to private schools.
It's like disruption, like that's the problem with state-run anything, which of course, communist people like will never want to own up to, is that it's like, it's really friggin' slow. Like everything needs to go through, all the various comrades in order to be able to, actually reach the conclusion where it's like, you can have the other extreme where you have, like one person in control that leads everybody astray and fucks it all up. But that's why there needs to be that balance. And with school, like public schools, it just moves too damn slow. They're not, you need to think like an entrepreneur. I mean, this is literally people's lives that you are directing for, like, in every way, pretty much, in terms of their mental model. Like, you have parents and shit like that, but if they're spending all this time in school, that's having as much of an impact on them as anything else.
Yeah.
So it's like people, I just don't think they take it seriously enough, and there's not enough initiative behind the notion of what it is. And so it's like, but like, to speak to something else Robert says, like, so a teacher is going to teach 5 different ways. That would be a completely, valid, like, obstacle. I think that if the system changed in that way, I think the way that the teacher would look in that system would not be the same. So the teacher would still probably be in control of things, but it would be, we're thinking more kind of like, I guess, like a ship's captain or something. Like, it's going to be leveraging things. So yes, the teacher is still going to be the one generally planning the broader strokes, but we're thinking, and I go to like marketing, you know what I mean? Because like we know that, but you think like a marketing manager, not the copywriter. Like right now, the teacher has to come up with every little thing that the students are going to go through. But like, obviously you couldn't do that under those circumstances. Like Robert said, like you can't just come up with 40 individualized, plans. Like, the teachers don't have enough time for that. They're so swamped as it is.
Interject very quickly. That is the current expectation.
But, obviously they can't, they don't, they don't have the time to do that. But that is why that AI learning element would leverage things in the sense of, it wouldn't make it harder for the teacher, it would make it easier, because the way that I look at it is that, yes, you would have the data gathering portion, and then you would have, once these given groups had been kind of determined, that is when you would see, okay, so like this group like works best with doing, this work group's best with hearing and all this other stuff. That is when the personality profiles would get this kind of there would be like a tailored approach for it all, because like it or not, like most things are moving towards like tablets and stuff like that. That is what we spend most of our time with. And if old people don't like that, unfortunately, they're just going to have to freaking suck it, because, people spend way more time on computers doing their jobs or working with their hands with a very particular kind of job than they do, having to do things a given way. And so I think if you had that system where you gathered that data, and then it was kind of synthesized so that it's like, okay, this is what works best this way. and then you had things tailored to those profiles, yes, the teacher would still need to vary things to one extent or another, but now they are starting from like a baseline where they don't need to figure it all out. And even if you didn't like super individualize things, I think still having that as the basis for teaching the students would make more sense. And, you know, you just have different software for the different students or whatever. I don't know.
I also think that this conversation can't happen outside of the addition of what the curriculum is. What is it that we're saying our kids have to learn, right? So when you're talking about the teacher teaching, what does she have? What's have to? And that be like just what.
It's not picking up your audio for some reason. Maybe you're too, I don't know if you're too far away or something. At least I'm not hearing it. That's the same for me.
I didn't touch anything.
Oh, now I hear you again.
Oh, it says my internet connection's unstable, so that's super fun.
Okay.
But when we're talking about what are the things that we are uncompromising on that our students have to learn in school?
Right.
And I believe,
like
personally,
English and stuff like that.
Yes, this is where we need a massive overhaul.
Right.
Because first of all, let's imagine a world where
in a
world where the curriculum is interest led. Okay, so the next thing you're going to learn about is based on your interests in the moment. So if your 6-year-old is super into cars and wants to learn how cars work, great, let's do like a junior mechanics class. And then if they're like, this is stupid, I hate it, I want to learn about bugs, great, here's a botany class. But then there are certain things that are, this is just again in my imagination, there are certain things that would be, you would have to know how to read, for example.
Right, yeah.
Everyone needs to know how to read. But a lot of the other shit, I don't know how actual, like how
across the board useful it is. Yeah.
Right. Like I understand that history is a great thing to teach students so that they understand and have empathy for things that have happened in the past. We try to avoid those things in the future. I don't really know how that fits into public education because I think the way we have it set up now, it doesn't. But I also feel that way about some of the more advanced sciences. Why the fuck would I need chemistry if I want to be, you know,
a hairdresser?
Well, actually, that's a bad example because you would need chemistry for hairdressing to some extent when you're mixing color. Yep. Okay. But like, if I wanted to be a landscaper, and I love being outdoors, I love the sunshine, and I just want to like use my body, what the fuck do I need chemistry for? I will never need chemistry. So like, I'm not saying I have the answers as to what we should keep and what we should throw away, but I do think it needs to be looked at, because if we can have way less that's like a firm requirement, like let's say the only firm requirements are being able to read at like a 5th grade level and being able to do simple math equations to like a 3rd grade level. And then after that, it's all interest led. It's like, okay, do you want to learn about any of this? And then with plenty of opportunity for people to change their mind. So maybe you've been on a track for till 8th grade where you want to do something mechanical and you're like, I actually hate this, I want to try something new. Great. What else would you like to try? So like that's sort of where I would love to see the future of education go naturally.
Segmenting.
Yeah, well, just the other thing is, how much more likely are you to want to learn something if you're interested in it?
Yeah, and it's actually something interesting that Matt mentioned, and I am trying to get to everybody's comments, like so that they don't feel like they're talking.
Do we have a lot of comments this time?
Yeah, well, between Robert and Matt Murphy, yes.
Hi, Matt Murphy.
And
hi, Robert.
Matt actually had an interesting point where it's like, he said, don't discount the value of kids learning to get shit done in non-optimal conditions and figuring out how to navigate a social network that isn't set up for their success. Because I guess that is kind of like, it's an interesting point in that it's saying like what is the inherent value of you need to make this work anyway.
Yes, agreed. That
Though
is a life skill.
the only thing is though is that just like how what you mentioned, and it ties into like what we kind of got at before, where you were saying like or we were talking about like if you have to get used to doing something you don't want to do, right? The discipline element of that. And then it, you know, it's similar, like in undesirable situations, like how will you handle it? But at the same time, most people go to school, most people graduate, not all of them, but like whatever, and most of them do about as well as the people who don't graduate. You know what I mean? Like all things considered, if you really think about it, like yeah, there's probably like a variance in like their economic income or whatever, but like they're probably just as undeveloped as people. They don't all become entrepreneurs and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So it's like I it is kind of a situation where yeah, maybe they are forced to do this, but they may not be learning how to do it. It's the same thing as how I've heard that like what's the whole thing, the exposure like therapy that, and I don't know if this is true, you would know better than me, but if you choose to expose yourself to something, it can be constructive. But if you're just forced to do it,
Yeah,
then it is not yeah.
Then
so
it's traumatic.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's that may be part of the reason, Matt, why some of these things, like I definitely agree with the point behind it, but school may not necessarily be doing it in the way that is actually beneficial. It's basically like when you get nutrients in a form that your body can't digest, you know, as a metaphor.
To Matt's point, this is actually like a whole nother subset, and we've touched on this in other podcasts, but this is actually a whole nother subset of skills, in my opinion, that should be included in curriculum. And we tend to refer to them as soft skills, and that language is changing to career readiness skills.
Even that name sounds more freaking white bread as we get further into the 2020s and whatnot. It's like, you know, well, this person isn't dead. They're, you know, corporeally disadvantaged.
Well, the idea is that there are some things that sort of we take for a given that aren't. So the idea of like showing up to work on time every day, or like just doing what your boss asks you to, or knowing how to have a conversation and pick up on social cues so that you can stay employed and not get fired. We have a whole list of them in Pennsylvania where it's like we are expecting to see the development of these skills by this age over time. But we don't necessarily have anything that explicitly is teaching them. It's supposed to be woven into the curriculum. So the idea is that, to Matt's point, that those kind of skills are extremely important for any person to be successful in life, anywhere. So that would have to be part of it, right? Like if we're talking about what do we need to get rid of that's actually required or compensatory, and what we're not going to, like I feel like this idea of these career readiness skills, social skills, soft skills, however you want to describe them, like has to be firmly lodged in the required section.
Yeah, and it is just one of those things where you have so many different factors at play, which is why I personally think that maybe the thing that we got onto earlier, which is that maybe private education wouldn't be the answer, but maybe it would be what would have to predate. God damn it, Slack. I wish that I could just mute the damn thing, but still see the freaking notifications. I wish that, or not wish that, I'm melding thoughts now, that there would almost need to be that private kind of spearhead of like just one group that's like, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And this person has a shit ton of money. And so they don't need to like really think about it because like they just feel this way and they're just going to throw it into that. And there would be that change, and people would see, you know, that would create enough of that kind of following in that sense that like it would spread to other things, because it is really difficult to think of like how would we change the public element over. We actually have quite a few people like responding to things today. Like Ken Zhang was saying like how his last business worked with like principals, charter schools, private schools, and public schools. And he mentioned how like many private schools basically are geared towards getting the family's kids into like Harvard and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But I think once again, it depends on your notion of what private school has to mean, because we're not, private school doesn't have to be that big stone building and such, like they look badass, you know what I mean? Like those fancy schools, but it doesn't need to mean that. Because the thing is that ultimately, like, yeah, going to Harvard and what, all this other stuff is great if you're rich, but private doesn't need to mean you need to go into this brick and mortar school. I mean, it's, you know what I mean? Like kids were doing freaking Zoom education while they're, whatever before. And I know that's its own challenges, but my point is, and it's something that we've gotten to several times, even when you were saying how we would need to rethink, like, what is a required topic? To what degree does that actually need to go? Like, do we really need to read all the classics of literature? Do we need to know this much science? Do we need to know that much math, et cetera? For all roles, is rethinking what people are assuming has to be included in the first place.
Yeah.
Because private school does not need to mean it's going to Harvard and whatnot, because you don't need to go to those schools to be successful.
Well, that's
only if you think so.
That's very outcome driven, right? So to Ken's point, there is definitely a subset of people that are like, I want my kid in private school so they have the best chance to be in the top colleges, because that means they'll have the best chance of having the top whatever. It's very outcome driven. Right?
Well, and it's not even realistically outcome driven either,
But it's also the outcomes of what the parents want. How much has the kid been asked? How much do you want to go to Harvard? And if they do, it's probably because the parents made them see. That's very outcome oriented. So, what is your goal for your kid with the education? Because that's something we probably don't all agree on. My goal for my kid is not for them to go to Harvard. If that's what they want, cool. But I'm not going to assume that's what they want. I just want them to be able to function in society and make their own choices and be successful with the choices that they make. So now we're disagreeing, or now there's a difference in opinion on what outcome we want from school. And that is one thing I see as being a strength of private schools, is that great, there's this private school where the outcome is Harvard. That's what the desired outcome is. So we're going to work for that. And it's going to be different for everyone as to like, what do you want to get out of this? Honestly, I wish we had another hour, because
right?
I feel like I could just keep talking about this.
This has to be one of those calls that has felt the shortest, honestly. Like, it feels like we started talking 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, for real. So if you want to do part 2 of this education, I'm happy to do that. Like, this is a topic that I could just go off on. And it seems like we've gotten good engagement on this one, so I love that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are some things that are like, if it's seen as more of a social issue and less as a, like just purely philosophical kind of issue, or even if it's something like what Rebecca and me were talking about, where it's like, like wokeness has gone way too goddamn far, but like people can be tired of.
Oh, I think you froze.
No, I was just being very still, or maybe it was your internet connection making me still, but like sometimes you just get tired of hearing about the same damn thing. You know what I mean? And so like school is one of those things where like everybody knows it's jacked, but you don't hear about it as much as whatever else. You know what I mean? So maybe that's part of it. Or, who knows, maybe Thursday was just a better day for people. But that does actually make me think, because like I want to be, as I'm making more money, I want to be putting it back into the stuff that I'm doing. And so I might even just like, maybe I'll do like a third day during the week or whatever for it, because it's like, sometimes it's like, I'm not going to assume yours or Rebecca's availability or whatever, but it's like, even just in terms of like the frequency of topics, like before if it was just me consistently, I'm not going to assume people want to just see me talk, all week long. But if there's like different things to talk about and there's different ideas with different people and such, like even on the last episode, at the end, Rebecca and me were talking about how it'd be cool to have like 3 people on one.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that would change the dynamic.
So we could do something like that. Like we could even just do like another education call,
Well,
damn marketers,
Re-
episode.
Rebecca would be a really interesting guest to have on with a Canadian background, right?
Right,
Like,
true.
is there a difference, from country to country, and what her thoughts are on that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna ask her about that then, because
Yeah.
it's something that we could all talk about. So
Plus, I love Rebecca.
if you don't, there's something wrong. It's like
I know, yeah.
it's like if you don't like puppies, like okay, so how long have you been murdering and burying small children in your yard? Like like you just instantly assume there's something wrong with them.
Oh,
Um,
man.
but yeah, that would be cool. So definitely next Tuesday I'm gonna do something. What's I know that we're still on the call, but I don't give a shit. Um, what's your next week looking like?
For what day?
Tuesday or Thursday. Either
Thursday,
or.
I'm wide open. Tuesday, I have something going on in the morning.
Okay. So yeah, we'll plan for Thursday, and I'll see if Rebecca wants to come on then too, and we could maybe have our first not round table but triangular table.
I love it. It can be a round table, and we can still
And just
get
have
round
3
table.
people.
Yeah.
True. Very true. I guess because I don't want to ignore what Ken said at the very end. But and while I'll give you something to think about it as I'm reading it, because Javeria also said some people have this opinion that complex subjects like math trains the brain to do complex things in the future, like building a muscle.
Yes.
One can see that can happen, but also like again, like with Matt's point, theoretically that can happen. But if that was the case, then by making everybody take math, then everybody would be more like that. And we've seen that that is not the case with everybody. So if that was a uniform kind of effect that it had on people, then we would see that in a uniform application. So once again, I think it comes down to the personality and like the learning type and like just who people are.
To add to that, I think you could find that similar effects are evident outside of math, or outside of what we think of as math. So like when children play with blocks, the different lengths of the blocks and how they fit together is actually math. And so we see similar neural, oh my God, pathways being used for playing with blocks. So this is just one example, but I think there are other ways in which you could get the benefits of certain neural structures and pathways without the very confined box that we have put math in with education.
Gotcha. I guess to address what Ken said at the very end, because I'm sure you need to get going, but I just don't want to. Yeah, Ken said you need a lot of student test subjects with excited and motivated parents or completely absent parents to launch a different school model test. And both have problems of their own.
Yes.
I feel the tribe building and leadership works with a small group, but it'll take decades before the new practices will be applied and adopted across an entire country. It's tough to train and impact a million people, let alone 50 million people. I love the idea of massive change and testing, by the way. So it's, yeah, again, it comes back to, there's the notion, and then there's the practical application, like what would have to actually happen with it. So yeah, all valid points.
Yeah, very, very good points. I don't even have anything to comment on that because he's 100% right about all of that. And that's one of the reasons why it's so frustrating, right? Is that we can have these
kids.
Yeah, and how much money is going into education right now? And are we spending it effectively? And it's like, no. And it's very frustrating. And not to mention, schools already run as businesses, and they're always looking for ways to cut. And that just means every person that works in the school's job is harder. They get more resentful, and it's just this. It's a wildfire, honestly. And that's why we're seeing such a mass exodus of public school employees. I'm one of them. I got the fuck out, but it's not because I hated kids or I couldn't stand the heat. It was because it was an exercise in futility. It was just, I was never going to see the things that I needed to change in my time, in my working lifetime there. So I just broke glass in case of emergency and left. And luckily that's worked out for me, but yeah, we probably should wrap it.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I do think that's an example of what a lot of people are realizing that in a lot of other areas, but we will address that in another call. So yes, thank you once again for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
We look forward to our next engagements, consisting of the episode happening next Thursday, most likely at 10 a.m. And yes, I will hopefully see both you and Rebecca there.
Yeah, I'll see you next week, guys.
And
Thanks
we
again.
shall leave you at that.